Okay, so in Parshas Vayishlach, we have the story of Shimon and Levi, who go through the town of Shechem, basically massacre all the men who had circumcised themselves. And the response of Yaakov is an interesting response when he finds out what they did. The language is Vayomer Yaakov el Shimon ve'al Levi. Yaakov says to Shimon and Levi, Achartem osi. You've thrown off my equilibrium here. Got to be a better translation for that. They say you have discomposed me, but I don't know if that really. You've created some confusion here.
What is the shorish?
Oker is when it's with a chaf, so it's to murky something. So if you would go into a water and sort of stir up the mud on the bottom and make the water become murky, so that would be the root of it, which is because you've given us a bad name amongst all the people who live in this around us, and they could come and kill us. That's the issue. It doesn't. If Shimon and Levi are supposed to kill, then they're supposed to kill. We don't. Yaakov typically we don't see his behavior is well. What will the neighborhood think? And here it is, and we'll see it. It'll make sense. But right now, it should sound almost strange. That's his problem, and that's his response. And then Shimon and Levi respond to him, Hachazona yase es achosenu? Shall our sister be treated like a harlot? Didn't Yaakov know that? Didn't Yaakov understand that was their intention? What are they telling him new? And what's Yaakov's response to that? Nothing. Next parsha starts a whole new story. So there's some debate going on between Shimon and Levi and Yaakov, which on the surface it shouldn't make sense to us, because that's what happens when you study Parsha. When you study Parsha, just hearing the story, it almost sounds just like a story, but you look at it more closely and you have only questions. Then you look at it even closer and you have answers. Then you look at it even closer and then you have new questions, and then you look at it even closer and then you have answers. And the deeper you go, the more questions and answers you get.
So with the meaning of it meaning like murky, could it be that the first thing he was addressing is that they did something that was very morally questionable?
Perhaps, but I would never chastise someone by saying, you've really made it that I can't concentrate. There should be a much stronger way of saying you've done the wrong thing than that. So, I mean, that's what...
Is the problem that this translation, I mean, you just said, was to make things murky. I mean, that doesn't sound, is the point that doesn't sound like somebody taking moral umbrage.
Right. It doesn't sound like he's bothered by what they did, but more that the effect that it was causing on him. Uh-huh. And we're going to talk about that. At least this is within Rashi. I mean, if you look in the other commentaries, that's the way Rashi explains it. So hopefully, by the time we're done with this class, hopefully we'll have some approach as to how to look at these verses so that we see a full discussion here. That's the goal.
This may not have anything to do with where you want to go, but also when he hears about what happened to Dina, what's his response there?
Right.
It's like he says he was quiet until his son arrived.
Right.
It's like he really didn't have a response to that.
Right. So, and we know Yaakov is not without response. He's responded in other places. We haven't focused in on that, but hopefully that will be resolved as well. Okay, so in order to get some answer to these questions, we have to look at a debate between the Rambam and the Ramban. The Rambam and the Ramban debate the thought process or the justification of Shimon and Levi. This is a Rambam, you see on page 1. The Rambam is in Hilchos Melachim u'Milchamosehem, which is in the laws of kings and their wars. And in there, the Rambam has a discussion of the laws of the 7 Noachide laws. One of the 7 Noachide laws, as we've discussed, is the mitzvah of dinim, that the Noachides are commanded to set up a system of law. They are commanded, instructed to have a law system. So the Rambam says, well, what does that mean, that they're required to have a law system? So let's read it inside. V'keitzad hein mitzuvim ala dinim. How is it? In what way are they commanded to have laws? Chayavin lahoshiv dayanim. They are obligated to set up judges, and b'shoftim, and judges. B'chol palach u'palach, in every area. Ladun b'sheish mitzvahs elu, to judge these other 6 commandments. Ulahazir as ha'am, and to instruct the people. Uben Noach she'avar alachas mishava mitzvahs elu yehareg b'sayef. And a Noachide who transgresses any one of these 7 commandments is liable for the death penalty, specifically death by the sword. Ketzad, what do I mean? Echad over the avodah zarah, whether he worships idols, or sheberach es Hashem, or he blasphemes God's name, or sheshafach dam, or he kills, or shebal achas mishesh arayos shelahem, or if he has relations with one of the 6 forms of prohibited relationships which the Rambam had discussed earlier, or shegazal afilu pachas mishav prut, if he steals even the smallest amount, or she'achal kolshu me'ever melachai ubas melachai, if he eats the smallest amount of a limb from a live animal or a piece of flesh from a live animal, or she'ra echad she'avar alachas me'elu, you ready for this? Or if he sees another Noachide transgress one of these, velo dano, and he doesn't judge him, v'harago, and kill him, hareze yahareg b'sayef, he's killed by the sword. The Rambam is telling us a tremendous chiddush, unbelievable idea, that the 7 Noachide laws, all 7 are liable for the death penalty. I mean, just like if a Noachide would kill, he would be killed, so too, because he has a law that he must judge, if any Noachide stands by while another Noachide transgresses one of the other 6 commandments and doesn't judge him, then the bystander, the spectator, is liable to be killed by the sword. An unbelievable chiddush which we'll see the Ramban is going to reject. But the Rambam says that doing nothing is itself makes you guilty. And this is an unbelievable thing, because Mitzvah Hashem, when the great day of judgment will come, and all those nations who did nothing when there were murders going on in the world, when there were 6 million Jews being led to be slaughtered, all those people who said, well, it wasn't happening in our domain, it wasn't happening in our territory, the Rambam paskins that they are just as liable as the people who did it.
Oh yes. So what about the American law? Does that substitute for a system of laws?
Absolutely. According to, if the mitzvah is that they have to have a system of law, as long as they have a system of law, it works. Now, what about corruption within the law? So that's a question. You have to. It's hard for us. You would have to bring it to a posek and Hilchos B'nai Noach to decide at what point does a law move past being law to being a corrupt system. As long as it's a fair system, it works.
I mean, my question is more like, we don't put to death people who rob, who steal. We don't put to death people who...
We don't put anyone to death because we don't practice these laws. But assuming that we were alad maseinu, all the Jews were in Eretz Yisrael, and we had a Sanhedrin, and we had the ability to kill, we might be bound by Torah law to put to death a Gentile who we have domain over, who transgresses one of the 7 Noachide laws.
And what did you say, Sam? In the Holocaust, people who saw...
So the concept, for sure, according to the Rambam, seeing someone else transgressing and not doing something about it is called transgressing one of the Noachide laws.
What's they got to do in the Holocaust?
Are you saying all the other nations claim we didn't do anything? We
Oh.
weren't
They know
involved.
what's happening.
Oh, you're
Right,
talking
so-
nations, not talking
Well,
about
yeah,
Jews.
no,
All
the
the
nation.
genocides that have happened in the world since.
That's
that
part.
we all know about it.
That's
And
part of what we're discussing. Is it the job of our nation that we're living in now, or any nation, is it their job to say, well, there are these people who are committing crimes across the world and it has no effect on us, but we have to stand up for the rights of the people who are being oppressed? Is that something we have a right to do? Is that an obligation which we have? Or not? That's part of what we come to when, especially seeing the next line in the Rambam, because the Rambam says, "Umipnei zeh," because of this, Nischaybu kol bali Shechem hariga, the people of Shechem were liable for the death penalty because of exactly this crime. Shaharei Shechem gazal, Shechem stole. In other words, taking a girl by force would fall under the category of theft. Vehem ra'u, they saw. V'yadu, they knew. V'lo danuhu, and they didn't call him to judgment. And so therefore, the entire city became obligated to be killed.
Yeah, but it's assuming allowed to think that every single person in the city, every adult man in the city knew or saw.
They did. They all knew. Because this was common knowledge. And nobody stepped up. Nobody said anything. No one protested. The commentaries answer that, but they say that if the people would have stood up, the people would have stood up. They should have deposed him. They should have done something.
Well, can the people who make the mistake be teshuva in any way, shape, or form, or are they always judged to death for stealing a dime?
Well, it sounds like they get killed. You get killed, you get killed.
Because it sounds like in the story with Dina, they sort of want to make up for it by marrying.
Right. Well, it turns out that was all a ruse, right? So uben Noach nerag be'ed echad u'bedayin echad. The ben Noach can be killed even based on the testimony of one, even with a judge of one. Below asra, even if there wasn't proper warning. Balpi krovim, even if the witnesses are relatives. Those are all laws within the Jewish court, but within the Gentile courts, they are entitled to accept relatives, which they do in the United States of America. Certainly, in terms of testifying against, typically is that correct? Testifying against, they will take a relative. They won't disqualify a brother or a sister. Certainly in the case, we would consider that to be even more believable if a brother or sister would testify against someone. Women might not have this obligation, which is why they only kill the men in the city of Shechem, a whole separate discussion which we could have. That's the Rambam's understanding of what happened in Shechem. That the people transgressed the law of having laws. Says the Ramban, and here we go to page 2. I'm not going to read it all inside because it'll take up all our time, but just the underlined parts. Says the Ramban, V'ein dvarim alolu nechonim be'enai. These words are not correct in my eyes. I disagree with the Rambam. She'im kain, because if that's the case, then Yaakov should have been the first one out there with his sword. Yaakov should have been the one to do it. And even if you want to say that Yaakov felt that he was afraid, meaning, not that he was afraid for his life, but he felt that you're not allowed to endanger yourself in order to do this. Lama Kaas Albanov. But why does he get so angry at Shimon and Levi? And then a long time later, he actually curses their anger. As we know, then the blessings of Yaakov and the Berchas Yaakov, as much as we call them the blessings of Yaakov, they actually have a couple of not such great blessings there, where he says, he curses Apam, Arur Apam. He doesn't curse Shimon and Levi themselves, but he curses their tempers, he curses their anger, and he says that with their anger, they wanted to kill out, or they did kill out, the entire city of Shechem. So Yaakov tells them off for it. if what they did was in fact a heroic act, which maybe wasn't such a safe act to do, but it turns out that they survived it, and so therefore they performed this great mitzvah, then why would Yaakov be so angry with them? He goes on, I'm not going to read it all inside, but he says, if they got the mitzvah, and they trusted in their God, and their God protected them, then certainly that should be a proof to Yaakov that what they did was the right thing. Rather, says the Ramban,
Who's saying that their God protected them? Ramban?
well, it worked out. The Ramban is saying, why, if it really was a mitzvah to judge these people are supposed to die, then Yaakov should have been there killing them. So you'll say, maybe Yaakov reckoned that even though you're supposed to kill them, you don't have to endanger yourself in order to kill them. Okay, so maybe it was a big risk that they took. But because they were successful and nothing bad happened to them as a result of it, that means that Hashem protected them and helped them do it. So then if that's the case, Yaakov in the end should say, that was a very dangerous thing to do. You guys got lucky that Hashem stepped in for you. But he shouldn't be cursing them like they had committed some atrocity.
Well, he was cursing their anger.
Right, but that anger was for a positive purpose.
But it wasn't. They shouldn't have done it for anger. They should have done it because it was the right thing to do.
But if that's the case, if it was the right thing to do, then why didn't Yaakov do it? Because it was the right thing to do.
One person against an entire city, one person who's older against an entire city. These are two strapping young men.
He should have been involved in the process, at least.
Perhaps he felt like he couldn't.
Planning of it.
Well, you could say that, but that wouldn't be arur apam. He would curse their impetuousness or something.
This assumption that just because they did it and were successful doing it means that somehow Hashem approved or was protecting them. Lots of people successfully do things that we know are completely against.
No, we need a step before that. We need a step before that. In other words, we have to assume it's the right thing to do. Once you assume it's the right thing to do, then you could say, but it involves a danger. Then you could say, but the fact that God protected them shows that in this case, the right thing to do defeats the danger. But that has to assume that you already know it's the right thing to do. And that's what he's saying. He's saying to the Rambam, if it's the right thing to do, then Yaakov shouldn't have been upset. On the contrary, if it would be the right thing to do, then Yaakov should have seen their success as a sign of God's acceptance of this risk. And therefore he says, therefore it wasn't the right thing to do.
Ramban says that?
So says the Ramban, exactly. Right, we'll see. I'm just going to read outside and we'll get to the underline soon, but I'm going to say outside what the Ramban says. So he says, rather I think that when the Torah obligates the Noachites to have a system of laws regarding these 7 laws, that's not referring to these 7 laws, meaning that they have to judge people on these 7 laws. That's just saying that they have to have a court system, a judicial system, which provides for a proper society. They need laws of stealing and laws of business laws and laws of cheating someone else and laws of custodians and laws of damages and laws of borrowing, lending, and business deals, laws of monopolies. That's what we're obligated to. The Noachites are obligated to have. And therefore, if someone transgresses those laws, they're liable for the death penalty. Because basically what we're saying is that they're supposed to create laws that nobody should... What would be a good fair business law? That no one should use insider information to trade stocks. Right? You're not allowed to call up the company, get insider information because you've got some cousin who works in that company and knows of a big deal coming up. You can't use that information to trade stocks, which is actually a very, very difficult law, because what am I supposed to do about the fact that I know? It's a difficult law, but it is an American law, and it's an important American law. Otherwise, we would have a system where it wouldn't be about the guesswork involved in the market. It would be about who can get better insider information. Right? Insider trading is something which American law, it would make sense that there could be countries that wouldn't have insider trading laws. So basically, says the Ramban, the law, the seventh Noachide mitzvah, is that they should have laws. If America chooses to do a law of insider trading, that's their choice. And then if someone transgresses and does insider trading, then they're liable for the death penalty. But the judge who fails to judge such a case is not liable for the death penalty.
If the judge doesn't judge them or doesn't
Right.
make him guilty.
Right, if the judge doesn't exact the proper punishment from someone who transgresses the laws, the judge is not liable for the death penalty. The country should set laws. Those laws make you liable for the death penalty.
Every single law that a country other than the Jewish country establishes, every law requires the death penalty.
Yes, if it's within the system of dinim. You could argue maybe only the major dinim, you could get into that, exactly what's liable for the death penalty. But the key is, according to the Ramban, the death penalty is for transgressing the laws, not for failing to judge or to enforce the law. Furthermore,
Is that not the, I'm sorry, is that not the case with Jewish law? I mean, a judge who did not enforce the law in a Jewish country run by the Torah, would he be liable for something?
well, let me put it this way. If someone steals $1 million, they have to pay back $1 million. In some cases of theft, they would have to pay back $2 million. If a judge purposely, wantonly, lets his friend go without needing to pay the $1 million, you cannot punish that judge. You cannot exact that $1 million from the judge. There's no such punishment. So even though the punishment for taking from someone $1 million is that you have to pay back $1 million, a judge who fails purposely to judge such a case is not liable for that penalty. And in the same way, he's saying a judge would not be liable for the death penalty. Furthermore, we're going to avoid the exact text that he quotes, but let's look at the next underline. Nir mikan, we see from here, and we're ignoring what that source is, Shirashai hagoy lomar lebali adin eini niskak lachem, that a Gentile is allowed to say, I don't want to get involved. Again, he's quoting a source. Kitosefesi be Yisrael, because the Jews have a special law, lo saguru mipneish, you're not allowed to be afraid of any person. Jewish judges who reject a case out of fear transgress a biblical law. They have to take every case. Al tachnis devarecha mipneish. Don't hold back your words because of a person. But a Gentile is not obligated to judge a case and cannot be held accountable for not wanting to get involved. And then he puts in what you said. Especially if the person who committed the crime is the mayor of the town, or the count, or the king of the town, and Shechem is the son of Hamor who runs this city, certainly we're not going to obligate the poor farmer for failing to stand up and call out the leader of the town. So the Ramban rejects the Rambam's approach. So why is the Rambam being so tough on these guys? I'm sorry, let's say it even more. So the Rambam basically, the Ramban rejects the approach of the Rambam. And it's interesting because you would think that the Ramban is coming to the defense of the people of Shechem, but he isn't. He says, rather, you know why they got killed? They got killed because they were a bunch of wicked people. They weren't killed because of them being spectators to someone else's crimes. They were killed because they themselves committed crimes. Says the Ramban, what are you looking for obligation? The people of Shechem and really all 7 nations. Were they not idol worshippers? And adulterers? They did every abomination of God. Ramban, the reason that they were killed was because the day they walked in, every single person in the whole country is liable for the death penalty. They were all transgressing laws that they knew they weren't right. They were corrupt from the eldest to the youngest. Every man in that city deserved death. They were all kinds of crimes, idol worship and adultery. I mean, think about it. The fact that the leader of the town somehow feels entitled to take some girl and nobody does anything. How did he know no one was going to do anything? He wasn't worried because everybody does it. This is a city of bad people. They deserve to be killed. So the Ramban has rejected the Rambam's approach that they were liable for the death penalty because they didn't judge. But he too assumes that the people were liable for the death penalty because of all the atrocities that they had committed.
So what gives Shimon and Levi the right to be judge, jury?
I was just thinking.
Right, yeah.
So says the Ramban, very good, exactly. So says the Ramban in the next underline, the reason why Yaakov's upset with them, it's not your job. It's not the job of you, Shimon and Levi, to become the judges of the world. In other words, Yaakov's upset with them, not because they didn't deserve to be killed, but who asked you to be the judge? Who appointed you the executioner? When the Jews come into Eretz Yisrael, Hashem says to them, you should know these are people who've been committing crimes for hundreds of years, you need to wipe them all out. So Hashem has instructed them to kill. But who asked you? Who appointed you? Who made you the judge over anyone else? Now, Ramban is very clear here, he says. Aval inyan Shechem, the story with Shechem, Ki b'nei Yaakov bavur shaya anshe Shechem rishayim, because the people of Shechem were very bad people. V'damam chashuv lehem kamayim, and therefore they were already, their blood was not on their hands. In other words, these people had already sentenced themselves to death. Ratzu li nakem mahem b'cherev nokemes, so they wanted to take the vengeance for the crime. So basically, Shimon and Levi thought, we're not doing this because we're appointing ourselves judges. They said, by him committing a crime against us, entitling us to vengeance, we can then kill already guilty people. And this is the way the Ramban is explaining it. That Shimon and Levi said, we're basically saying like this. Yaakov says to them, why'd you kill? Why'd you kill these people? They said, because they're a bunch of idol worshippers and sinners. So Yaakov said, well, who made you the judge to go kill idol worshippers and sinners? To which they say, because we weren't going to judge them. We've been living here for a while and we haven't killed them all. But as soon as they took our sister, now we are going to punish Shechem for taking our sister and his people for being accessories to that crime and invoke their already liability to death as a right for us to take vengeance.
And are we allowed to take vengeance? I mean, could the people who lived through the Holocaust, and they were in DP camps in Europe, could they have taken arms and gone against the German people?
They did. They went Nazi hunting. And
that's different.
Why?
No.
They just went and they took arms against people in the city. Said
The
you knew what was
No,
going
but he's
on.
saying
The
that.
partisans went around and they went around executing. After
Right, I mean, but the people who executed citizens, without knowing that they were actually guilty, I don't know if anyone's going to, yes, but I don't know if it would be justified. But the ones that killed Nazis, I can't imagine that they were, when they came up after 120, that God somehow said to them, who gave you the right to be the judges? I can't picture that. So basically, that's what the Ramban is saying, that they were they weren't going to turn themselves into executioners, into judges, until they wanted to exact revenge for what had been done to their sister. And in terms of death, they're killing people who deserve to die, but in the process, they're exacting the vengeance for their sister.
But that still begs the question. Maybe they had the right, even by Torah law, to kill Shem himself. But it still begs the question, why do they still have the right to kill everybody else?
Again, we have to change the question, though. The question isn't why do they have the right to kill everyone else, because those people are liable for the death penalty. The only problem is who made you executioner, who made you judge. So for that they're saying their accessory to this crime gives us at least that amount that we took on that role of being their judge. Because they were accessories and didn't stop this, we sort of took the initiative to then say to them, well, actually, you know what? You guys are just as guilty in this crime, and therefore we're going to give you what you truly deserve.
But how are they accessories unless they actually helped plan the crime and helped cover up the crime? Or
we're assuming
the situation is because Rabbi just got finished saying that they're not required to speak up against it.
Right, but they still could have done something. They're not required to. Again, they're not being killed because of that, but they could have. The problem is, whatever argument you present in defense of Shimon and Levi is then going to be a question on Yaakov, right? And then when you defend Yaakov, now what are Shimon and Levi thinking?
How about the fact that they then plundered the city and they took their cattle and their donkeys and whatever was in the town and their children and their wives?
Well, once you've killed all the men and the money's just laying there, why not take it?
But what about the wives? Maybe, if we were talking about illicit relationships, maybe some of the women were involved in those things too.
Well, according to the Rambam feels that the Ben Noach women are never obligated in terms of communal responsibility. We're not going to hold them accountable, and that's interesting because Rus.
Not the responsibility, but being an active participant in the
I don't know. Maybe if you were to figure out if any individual women were accessories to this crime, maybe they wouldn't have been spared. Maybe. Finishes, yes?
Do they have the right to assume everybody that they killed was truly guilty of some crime?
Again, according...
It also depends on the age of the people they're guilty to.
Well, the Ramban is certainly assuming that Shimon and Levi had a ledger of every single citizen in town having been an idol worshiper or an adulterer or something. And in those days, that would not be so difficult to have a whole city of idol worshippers, or a city where they would have public adultery ceremoniously performed, where basically everyone in town would be liable for such punishments.
So it's a definitely a different situation than today, where a group of people might be evil in a certain way, but we don't want to be prejudiced that everybody.
You are right. I would not say that we should assume that the average citizen in the United States of America is transgressing any of the Noachide laws. I think even they do kill their animals before they eat them. Generally speaking, they don't blaspheme God in a prohibited way. Stealing, laws, killing, idol worship, and adultery. I think there's plenty of good citizens of the United States of America who have, even without knowing that they're avoiding those 6, just not done those 7.
But even in terms of, like, Muslims are, that.
Well, they too would not,
Right, that's what I'm saying. It's not
even they who the world is now dealing with their
fanatics.
with the I don't know, can we use radical? We're still allowed to use that word, right? With the radicals amongst them, those radicals are very, very few compared, at least the ones that are acting out on it, very few compared to the billion of them that exist.
And even 1% of a billion is 100 billion.
Yes, that is true.
Even if it's a very small percentage, you're still talking about tens of millions of
Absolutely,
taxpayers.
absolutely. But we still don't make a general statement and say that therefore you can wipe them all out. You can't halachically say that. You might say that because that's how you feel, but it would not be halachically justified.
Or some would
So-
say that,
Differentiating the two situations.
or some would say that Christians are Avodah worshiping Avodah Zarah.
We don't paskin like that. We don't paskin.
Well, isn't there a difference between Catholics and
Even there,
Protestant?
the halacha is as ruled by in the Shulchan Aruch by the Ramah that Christianity is not considered idol worship in this regard, and it's very important because there might be halachic issues with entering into a business partnership with an idol worshiper, and because we paskin the halacha is that it's not considered idol worship. That's the only reason why we have business relations with them. Okay, it finishes the Ramban. V'sham, we're on all the way on the left side of page 3. V'sham arar apam, and in the end, he does curse their anger. Ki asu chamas la'anshe ha'ir, because they did treachery towards the people of the town. She'amru lahem b'mamad v'yishavnu eschem v'yinu la'am echad, because maybe the people were accessories or bystanders in the crime, but they made a deal with them. They made a deal with them which said that if you do circumcise yourselves, you'll become one people with us. V'hema yubocharim b'Hashem, and therefore technically they chose to be God's people. Ubatu b'diburam, and then Shimon and Levi broke their word. V'ula yeshuvu al Hashem. It says the unbelievable words of the Ramban. The Yaakov was saying maybe these people were going to do teshuvah. V'hargu osam chinam, and you killed them for nothing. Ki lo hereu lahem klal, because they did nothing wrong. In other words, unbelievable pshat of the Ramban, that the people of Shechem, maybe you could have killed them before you made that agreement with them. But once you made this deal with them, you've begun them on the road to teshuvah. You've said to them, well, you've got, I think you were starting to say this, you've, not for Shechem and Chamor, I mean, they're, but at least for the people said, you know what, these are good people, let's get with them and we'll circumcise ourselves, and they'll become sort of like the people of Yaakov. And so Yaakov was expecting that this was going to be the teshuvah of these people. They would throw away their idols. And one of the commentaries says, almost tongue-in-cheek, unfortunately it's not tongue-in-cheek, that why did Shimon and Levi tell them they have to circumcise themselves? Why didn't he tell them some other medical procedure that would weaken them, and then they could kill them? If the whole thing was a ruse, why do circumcision? So he says, tongue-in-cheek, but not so tongue-in-cheek, he said, because once they circumcise and they become Jews, then no one in the world will protest if they're being killed. But
This does ring true to me, because to get even one person as an adult to agree to circumcise themselves,
right,
much less the entire town,
right.
that's really quite
You mean the Ramban? It sounds like a major move on their part.
right.
And so it says the Ramban, so it's interesting because now Shimon and Levi, what's going to be their response to this? Their response is, we don't have to give them this kind of chance. We don't have to give them the chance because they're already guilty. They were accessories to this crime. And therefore, we can hold them accountable for what they did. The fact that they are now, we're sorry, we'll never do it again, Shimon and Levi says, well, sorry, it's too late for that.
Does tshuva count for goyim?
So, tshuva for goyim is a whole discussion on its own. Typically, if someone asks that question, the immediate response people will want to say, well, it worked for Nineveh. Right? So the question is, how does it work for Nineveh, and exactly in what way does it work for Nineveh? For example, let me say it like this. If, let's say, there's a person who commits murder intentionally in front of thousands of witnesses, the case is open and shut, comes to court, 69 judges say guilty, one says innocent, because if 70 say guilty, he's going to go free. So 69 judges say guilty, one says innocent, and the guy is they set him up they're going to kill him in a couple of hours. we see that the man starts to pray. He starts to cry. He's calling upon heaven and earth that he's repentant and he's sorry. And the clouds open and the sun shines down on him. And a heavenly voice rings out and says, that's the greatest teshuvah that the world has ever known.
Still kill him.
Still kill him. Even if we know, even if he escapes, and he spends the next 30 years saving lives. He stands at the seashore and pulls people out during the day, and at night he beats up all the robbers and muggers. He becomes the superhero of the town, and he's saved thousands of people. When we catch him, we put him to death. Even though he says, I killed one person, and I felt bad for it so much that we still, because the law is the law that once he's liable for the death penalty, he gets the death penalty. So when we talk about teshuvah doesn't work for a Jew once he's liable for the death penalty by the hands of the court. So Shimon and Levi are saying they're liable for the death penalty. Well, they haven't been convicted, but they don't really need conviction, because one judge can convict them. One witness can convict them. So,
One judge, not as a system, but one person who self-elects themselves.
well, no, you need a judge, but you could be just one judge.
Is the Ramban's distinction that perhaps they were already doing shuvah, and since you have to be convicted of the crime in order to be penalized for it, the state of mind of the person who did the act has to be taken into account.
You mean at the time of the crime?
No,
Or at his present time?
at the present time.
Well, you see, the thing is, the Ramban doesn't quite say that by agreeing to be circumcised, they've done teshuvah. The Ramban says this is a step towards, and his language is v'ula yashuvu al Hashem. Maybe they were inspired. You don't know.
You can't really say Yeshuva with Hashem because they never were with Hashem. It's not a case
Right,
of returning.
that's a good point, but we still use that
Conversion
word.
would be
Yeah,
converting.
we still, yeah.
This is
It's
really
coming.
explaining Yaakov's mindset, though. Not that Ramban's saying this was a possibility, that this is what Yaakov was thinking was the possibility.
Right,
Correct?
correct.
Okay. All right.
So now, according to the Ramban, we have a whole new story going on here. If I can go back to the verses for a minute, where he says, Yaakov says to them, Vayomer Yaakov al Shimon ve'al Levi, achartem osi. You have created lack of knowledge of what's really going on. You've made everything murky. That was, you shot first and asked questions later. You didn't allow the situation to clarify itself to see who was actually liable for the death penalty. Achartem osi means you've taken away our ability to really know what's happening. Almost as if Yaakov was saying, I was going to give these guys 6 months, and whoever turns around would have been accepted, and whoever would have walked away or committed crimes again, I would have had you kill them, or kill them myself. But Yaakov is saying what you've created is a lack of clarity within the situation. And what caused you to have a lack of clarity? Your impatience, or your quickness to judge, or your desire for immediate vengeance, and you didn't give things a chance. That's why it now makes sense. Arur apam, he curses their anger.
Okay. They're the ones who went in and killed everybody. The idea of asking for the circumcision, though, was presumably not just their idea. Telling them to be circumcised, right? I mean, that wasn't just Shimmer and Levi.
Right. That was not just
Okay.
Shimon and Levi.
So for the sake of argument, we assume that the other brothers agreed that the people ought to be weakened, and they should use that weakening not to kill them, because the other brothers didn't do that, but rather simply to rescue Dinah.
Well, that's a different approach. We'll talk about that, I think, maybe next Sunday, in terms of that approach. But let's work within the Ramban.
Okay.
Let's take what you're saying and saying that the other brothers maybe wanted them to be circumcised to give them a chance to repent and convert and change their ways. And Shimon and Levi, instead of using this as a way to vet the people, Shimon and Levi use this as a way to exact vengeance and to become executioners over the people.
We don't know their actual mindset as to why they did go along with this. It could have also been, what Morris said, that, we'll make an economic deal. We'll trade our daughters and sons. They may have wanted to get in on the goods.
Right.
Or it could, we don't know if there would have been repercussion from the higher ups, namely the guy running the city, if they didn't go along.
Right. So according to the Ramban, Yaakov, and maybe the brothers, as Dr. Appleson is adding, were intending to see through this process, basically wait 6 months and see who means it seriously and who doesn't. So the people who circumcised and then actually changed their ways and stopped worshiping idols and stopped committing crimes of adultery, then those people would be considered to be saved people who redeemed themselves, and the other people would have been put to death.
This is really problematic for me, at least, because what you're saying, their thought process would have been, how is that different than radical Islamists who say, oh, well, if people accept Islam and really do the right thing, then we know they're okay, and if they can't recite from the Quran, we kill them. Or different from,
But what you're asking is really a general question. And why does the Torah obligate us to kill someone who transgresses the Noahide laws? Why do we kill them? The answer is because that's what the Torah says we have to kill them. And again, we're not.
Islamists say the Quran tells them they have to do it too.
Yes. I don't know if that's the problem. The problem isn't that they are killing people based on what their book tells them. The problem is that they are okay. The question here, I guess, to put it simply, would be.
It sounds to me like almost. I understand that there's this whole thing about this crime that's going on too.
Right. Well, that's what we're saying right now is the difference. Okay. We've moved past basically Yaakov saying to them, "Who made you the judge?" In other words, they have the 7 Noahide laws. If someone transgresses it, they're supposed to be brought to court and judged and given the death penalty. And if that in some way people don't like because it's similar to radical Islam, I wouldn't say it's similar to radical Islam. I'd say any crime that comes with the death penalty.
No,
right. The thing is, people sort of becoming vigilantes and taking on themselves. So the Ramban has addressed that by saying that Shimon and Levi said if they wouldn't have involved themselves in the taking of our sister, we would never have involved ourselves with them to become vigilantes over them. We're not looking to judge people. We've been here for a few months or years, or a few months, and we haven't gone around killing people we saw committing crimes. It just wasn't our business, and it wasn't the day that Hashem appoints us to be judges. But now we already have to judge them because we have to hold them accountable for what they did to our sister. So at that point, we are going to take that opportunity not to do something to them they don't deserve. Again, it's all within that, and that's where we're getting now. Yaakov says to them, "You've mucked up the whole thing. You've created confusion and lack of knowledge, of awareness of what's happening. And to the nations of the world, they'll wonder whether or not your crime was justified. So the complaint against us, or if I could say the Chilul Hashem against us, when people will say, look at the ruse of Shimon and Levi, when these people were already, they never gave them a chance to apologize and to fix things. To which we now understand Shimon and Levi's response was, Hachazona yasa es achosenu? Will they make our sister like a harlot? In other words, they had already crossed the line. They'd already gone so far that we don't have to give them a chance. And so now, Yaakov, there's no need to respond because it's clear what the difference between Yaakov. Yaakov says that we need to give people that extra chance even if they seem to have crossed the line. While Shimon and Levi claim that once they've crossed the line, they didn't want to give them that chance. And Yaakov doesn't respond now. He responds many years later when he, on his deathbed, when he says, I will now respond to you and say, maybe what you did was justified according to the technical law, but your anger didn't allow you to make the rational, justified this decision, which would have been to really give these people that chance and see who's willing to change.
I've got a couple questions. First of all, technically, weren't B'nai Yaakov and his family, weren't they also B'nai Noach?
Yes.
So they were really held by the same laws.
They were. They did follow these laws.
They didn't have other mitzvahs that they were obligated. I mean,
If-
supposedly they kept them.
Right. But they were bound by the Noachide laws, absolutely.
Right, so the Noachide laws were theirs also.
Yes.
Okay, and number two is, what was I going to say? Go ahead.
Okay. So,
Now, how does the Rambam answer all this? The Rambam.
Oh, wow.
so the Mefarshim, there's a lot of Mefarshim here to resolve this Rambam. According to the Rambam, it's going to be a little bit harder because if you're liable for the death penalty for even watching, so then why would Yaakov not have killed them like the Ramban asks? And there's all kinds of answers. You look in the Mefarshei Rambam, they give answers, but one of the answers is what you mentioned before, was that they're only liable if there is valid proof that they could have done something. And here, because he was the prince, there was at least enough lack of clarity that they had power to do anything, and that would have been maybe the debate, according to the Rambam, that would be the debate between Yaakov and Shimon and Levi, whether or not the people of the city could have stood up against Shechem.
Well, like
I know what it is.
Lavan took advantage 100 times,
Right.
but Yaakov endured it.
Yes.
He endured it here also.
Yes.
They might have been entitled. They're a small group of people. They got the whole right there. He doesn't want to start up with them, even though.
Absolutely.
Even though they
I'd like to, with whatever time we have left, elaborate on that. That might be the most important point here. Absolutely.
No, I was just going to say that I find it unbelievable that a whole town is willing to circumcise themselves with not only the risk of bleeding, infection, which I'm sure was rampant there, and death.
I think the pain is really
I'm
the
sure.
big issue.
Well, okay, pain also, but
I mean, just in terms of when you go to a person and you say, "Would you like to? In order for our city to work out well, we need you to cut your finger." Yeah, you might get, but you might have a harder time with.
right. So I find that astonishing, except that Shem and his father must have had super tight control over the city, and they knew they would get killed if they didn't.
That's a pretty good proof. Although it does seem from that since Shem and Hamor needed to use such a convincing speech, that there was some interaction. And again, that could be the debate, according to the Rambam, between Yaakov and Shimon and Levi, based on the way that it happens. But I'd like to finish with just this one final point. This might be, as I just said, the most important point here. According to the Ramban, and maybe even according to the Ramban for sure, the Yaakov's biggest complaint here is, you know what? If someone does something wrong, you don't have to get heated about it and become the vigilante, to become the judge, the jury, the executioner. it's not always your job to say something. And there are many times that people do things within a community, within a household, within even a country, where someone commits a crime and people are so outraged by this person having committed the crime that they call for this person's head. Why? It is wrong what that person did, but why is that your problem? Why are you so worried about what someone else has done? Why is that making you emotional? Why is that making you angry? And that's a problem within us that Yaakov is trying to say. And I think what Rabbi Cohen added, which is that you see Yaakov watches Lavan cheat him every day, come in with a new deal, a new version of what yesterday's deal had been. And Yaakov just takes it patiently and with understanding and never loses his cool. It could be that that's why Yaakov is cursing their anger. He's saying, chill out. Not everything that everyone else does is your business and something that you have to deal with and something that you have to get all worked up over. And that is Shimon and Levi. That's the Arur Apam Ki Az. The lesson of the story of Shechem and the argument between Yaakov and Shimon and Levi, according to this explanation, is a debate in terms of us. When we see people committing crimes, when we see people doing something wrong, especially this wasn't a crime done against them, but this was their general, all the bad things that they were doing. Again, if it's your job to judge, but don't look to become someone else's judge. When you're finished judging yourself, when you've perfected yourself, when that day comes, then you can start to turn to other people. But until then, and anything less than that creates a murkiness, it creates a confusion. It doesn't allow us to process properly and to make the correct judgments. Thank you.